I think like the especially the biggest potential right now is like trying to understand what's really missing on the market, like what kind of content people want to see, and then produce this content at scale. And with this kind of techniques, it's just a matter of actually identifying different niches, because the content is not the problem anymore. You need to know what to look for, because you have so much data most of the time that you can easily get distracted by like minor things, or like get into very uninteresting angle for the particular story. So not only we have to get the data, but you need to know what to look for in this data.
That was Przemek Chojecki, CEO and founder of Contentize, a content generation platform built to disrupt how journalism and content marketing works. Przemek has a resume like no other. As a former Forbes 30 Under 30, Przemek has founded multiple companies, received a PhD in mathematics, and written 3 novels, 2 of which are in Polish. In this episode, we will hear Przemek's cutting-edge research on AI, his experiences starting various companies, and exactly how he interviewed over 1,000 executives in a very short time span. An engineer, banker, and dancer go on a hike.
They realize how things have changed and start a podcast.
Hi, I'm Jed, the banker.
I'm Shikhar, the engineer.
And I'm Adrian, the dancer. And we are THC.
We break down topics, meet pioneers, and share ideas.
Welcome to Things Have Changed.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to jump right into the conversation.
Going into what Contentize is trying to do and disrupt journalism. In the last 10 years, we've seen a very big shift from traditional TV, newspapers, and radio to more and more online content that companies are bringing up.
Or podcasts.
We have so many podcasts coming up. We just started less than 5 months ago. There's so many new venues to bring out journalism and content and news. What was the plan with AI and using AI and data to improve journalism that was lacking prior to you starting Contentize?
So I just want to mention that Contentize is primarily focused on text and not on videos and speech. So no podcast, no television.
Not yet.
At least not yet. Not exactly. Like this would require some additional deep learning methods to do that. And the goal is that with all this media, there are still a lot of journalists who are actually doing a lot of uncreative work. Like automation started actually already, like I think 10, 20 years ago, when people decided that, for example, weather news and traffic news can be automated, especially weather, different information, but always given in the same form. So it's all about a template you're building, and you just plug in your data, and that's the only change. Also, traffic is similar. You just want to say a given road is just, there's a traffic jam right now, so avoid that road, and that's it. And this is the kind of a job that I want to automate. But because if you go even further, then, for example, like the finance you mentioned, for example, every quarter, most of the companies have to issue some kind of a financial report. And then ideally, you would have different text summarization algorithms, which would just scan through the whole financial document and give you a summary, instead of, like a journalist going through that and probably making errors because he doesn't really care about what's inside. My goal in the end is be able to automatically create templates so that if you provide data, you will have a narrative built on that data. So it's like a tool for storytelling out of pure raw data. It's not only pure journalism, but you can use that in marketing. For example, e-commerce is also a perfect example of how you can use it, because if you're running a larger e-commerce shop, then probably you have like hundreds of thousands of different items, different products, and you need to produce constantly descriptions of all that stuff. And that's probably one of the most boring things you can do. But on the other hand, so most of the, of course, no one is doing that manually, but if you're not doing that manually and you're not using deep learning, then there's not really a lot of variance in that. And that makes your SEO really poor because you have a lot of repeated content.
So interesting, because you mentioned converting data and text into stories. Now, how is it that the AI would be able to convert something like expressionless data into more subtle features that's in a story? The thing I'm thinking right now is, your auto text, your auto typing. You're typing and then you can just click on words that show up and you create a story, but it doesn't really have any major significance in the story. How would you actually create a narrative by using like machine learning?
In general, that's really hard. We basically solve it by narrowing down to different niches, like this e-commerce things, like particular news for journalism, like social media, because, for example, you just want to summarize an article into a social media post, and so on. In the end, the goal would be to just feed in all the data you have and have like a story based on that. But if you don't give any context to the machine, that would be extremely hard and probably impossible right now. There were a couple of breakthroughs in text generation techniques, basically starting with OpenAI, which released a GPT-2 model. I don't know if you know the story. That was released in stages, basically starting with like the smallest model and then going up and making it bigger, the largest being 1.5 billion parameters. And the reason for that, for doing like this like massive model, but also stage, was that they were scared of malicious use of those kind of techniques for like spamming people and like running bots and just spamming every possible Reddit forum possible. But in the end, it happened that there weren't many cases of malicious use of that technology, so they decided to release the whole thing. And then there are also other researchers who jumped into that. Most notably, I guess, NVIDIA with Megatron model. And just like 2 months ago, I guess, there was announcement from Microsoft, and they trained Turing NLG, which was also this same set of ideas, but it was like 10 times bigger than the GPT-2 originally was. Those kind of techniques are really amazing because they answer the question you asked, meaning that you can give no context and then the machine will still generate something.
What is that a function of? General intelligence?
My understanding of how you should approach artificial general intelligence is through text. Like if you can understand text and reason upon text, then that's just as good as artificial general intelligence. And then adding like, I don't know, like vision or speech, that's like secondary. But understanding text is crucial. And especially reasoning upon text is crucial. And probably also that's what's missing and what's hardest, because if you think about machine learning, then basically machine learning is a statistical approach to data. It learns by getting all this data and like doing a bunch of computations, tuning it to weights. Maybe if you're doing reinforcement learning, then having different rewards along the way. But in the end, it's all statistics. And then the question is, can that contain reasoning in a pure logical form where actually you're able to infer from a couple of sentences another sentence? So and we're coming back to the why I'm interested in artificial general intelligence is because it would also answer things like, can machines do mathematical research? Mathematical research is like a baby case for artificial general intelligence, because if you can figure out how to reason and make these abstract claims, like just like mathematicians prove theorems, then you can probably also construct much more advanced algorithms which can reason in the real world.
This is only possible recently because of the breakthroughs in 2019 for AI, right? So all these new algorithms or OpenAI's new projects, the new general intelligence that's coming out.
Oh yeah, definitely. Every year we see different kind of breakthroughs, and 2019 was especially a big year for text. Previous years were big for vision, for speech. I think 2018 was big for like translations also, especially if you use Google Translate, then apparently it got much better recently. 2019 was big for text, but we're going to see like a lot of changes across every domain.
So, when you were talking about your studies at Oxford, getting your PhD at Paris, you said that you were just focusing on mathematics without any application before you were doing these startups. What was your motivation to go into journalism and content creation? I mentioned earlier that you're an author. You're a very passionate writer, from what I've read online, and you've done many blogs. So is that a little bit of a reason why you chose to venture into journalism?
Yeah. Basically, that's the link. I mean, I love writing, and I have been writing since I was like 12, I guess, with this two novels in Polish, one in English published, and there are like more books coming along the way. The next one being purely about artificial intelligence. So I love writing. So going into content and going into text understanding is very natural to me. I just went into text and I went into thinking about how I can automate content production. It naturally turned me into journalism and then marketing, e-commerce stuff.
Kind of segueing into how it works while keeping that creativity, because I'm sure that a part of what you love about writing is your creative freedom to express your opinions, your thoughts, your experiences. How do you maintain that level of creativity while being able to improve and streamline the process of collecting data and then creating a story out of it?
I did a bunch of experiment, like trying to write. Like in the past 6 months, I basically have written like 200 articles on Medium, which are available on my blog, which amounts basically to over one article per day on average. And I guess like half of them were generated in 100%. Then some of them were collaboration between me and AI, and then some of them I have written by myself fully.
Wow.
The goal for that was to actually understand whether I'm better at writing than AI is currently, and it turned out that it's really subjective. Like sometimes I thought that my article is better, but actually people more like the thing which was totally generated, like no input from me. Sometimes it was vice versa. But what worked the best in the way was that when I was able to cherry pick different suggestions from AI. So in the end, the creativity lies at the very beginning because you want to create the story about something which interests you and you give this first direction. And then you can collect some data and maybe start generating from that. But you still need to have this first idea on what's your story, what story angle you choose. And starting with that, you can start generating. So I would say that this whole set of ideas with automating will make the whole process much faster, but it won't replace this human being, which in the end is accountable for the story.
Well, it shows you how early in the stages you are because you're testing fully AI integrated versus like a hybrid of still contributing your own writing as well as kind of adding a little bit of the AI in there, and then also testing out how would it look like if you were to just solely write the article. So that's very cool that you're testing it
Yeah,
with like a
yeah.
knob, like turning it on, regulating it.
Yeah, exactly. Like the way I look at it is that I was creating content before, like in the form of like blogs, books, or whatever. But the idea behind Contentize is that make it at the production scale, and in a way, I'm like the first tester of my own software, so that not only like talk with commercial clients, like I said, like e-commerce or marketing teams or like journalist teams, but I also think about like what I would need from a software to make me better as a writer. And I think that's very beneficial because I can like tweak everything on the spot and like see what works, see what doesn't work, and make the necessary changes.
Lately I've been seeing a lot of companies just getting into the space of like creating content online, like having a large presence. So like I feel like this time would be so relevant for them to get into a production scale of producing this type of journalism. And you're not aiming to replace the
Augmenting
journalists
it.
within the companies, but you're sort of making the creative process more important, right? So for example, for finance, I could think about the application there. If you're to create a content for whatever I was looking for the results of Q1, right? So how was the revenue growth last month to this month? How's the revenue growth pre-quarter to this quarter? Like those kind of things I don't want to have to research and find. And more often times when we're producing results for THC, for example, like we did a lot of coverage on Q1 2020 that just came out, and we had to look at a bunch of data from Q1 2020, right? We had to go back and scrub the previous quarter's data and try to see like what was the growth, produce our own numbers and
the
things.
Transcripts of the calls.
Transcripts of calls. That's what I looked into a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I think like the especially the biggest potential right now is like trying to understand what's really missing on the market, like what kind of content people want to see, and then produce this content at scale. And with this kind of techniques, it's just a matter of actually identifying different niches, because the content is not a problem anymore.
Oh, because the data is available.
Yeah, but you need to know what to look for, because you have so much data most of the time that you can easily get distracted by like minor things, or like get into very uninteresting angle for the particular story. So not only you have to get the data, but you need to know what to look for in this data.
Yeah, like how do you decide whether something's an interesting angle?
For example, look at the financial data. Then what interests you is having different triggers set for example, you want to get a notification when a particular company relative to another company is at the lowest position ever, to trigger some event. So this is basically what already is happening with Bloomberg and Reuters. Bloomberg Terminal is doing amazing work when it comes to different kind of triggering of different data and drafting a story right away. And I basically read recently that, so before all these platforms came to be, some of the stocks which were underreported, which means that like no media were interested in like really reporting about the stocks, because they were not penny stocks, but they still weren't like the most popular stocks. They were not traded that often as when they become more described in the media. And that happened because actually they automated the whole process. So the information itself just changes the whole market.
Yeah, one example is the second you said that, I could think of it, because I remember AMD was under $10, and it didn't have too many. You can see the volume, right? You can see the number of watchers on the stock.
Yeah.
And they had a bunch of good media coverage, came on Jim Cramer a couple of times, and just started having good earnings reports, and they literally skyrocketed with regards to the number of viewers. Same with Tesla, just that media sound bites really pushed them up.
It's a part of the success, right?
Yeah.
Tesla is also, Elon Musk has figured this shit out.
Yeah,
he knows what
secured,
to do.
It's gone.
Yeah, it's just literally like on Twitter. Oh my gosh, dude. The amount of clout Elon Musk has and the amount of power he has to move the markets, it's actually ridiculous.
It is. Okay, I'm going to say it's illegal, but I can go in the whole...
He might be a guest next week. Let's see.
Actually, it's very funny because, like, if he says something, then the stock can go either up and down. Like, for example, recently, like he tweeted something like, in his opinion, the Tesla stock is like, the price is too high, and just went down.
That was an SEC straight up violation.
Yeah.
Przemek, do you see AI using public data and public biases to cause some negative possibilities? Like the first thing, I remember reading about all the stuff that you did, and the first thing that triggered in my head when I read AI and content creation was a few years back, this news exploded where Microsoft released an AI chatbot on Twitter called Tay. And the premise of the story is Tay, the chatbot, was super friendly, innocent, nice, welcoming. And it took hours, just hours, for Twitter to convert Tay, the innocent chatbot, into like a racist, neo-Nazi tweeting chatbot. So how do you prevent AI from picking up on the worst traits of humanity? Because we all know humanity is like seriously flawed. right?
No, so actually, what you just saying is like very important, because there are a couple of things when it comes to deploying AI, and in general, you want to make sure that whether that's like for yourself, for your organization, for a country, what's the bias, what's the uncertainty, and whether you can explain the model. So we can go with this one by one. Bias is basically inherent to data you provide, which means like it's nothing new, because it already might happen in like surveys done by psychologists. Because if you just take a sample which is not reflective of the whole society, which is not diverse enough, then you will get a bias. And the same thing will happen with machine learning models. For example, you're doing AI, which is to decide for students to get admitted into a college. But then you take data from like 100 years ago, when diversity in the US were totally different. And suddenly, because AI wants the new students, new applicants to be exactly like the alumni or like very similar, you get like massive loss of diversity when it comes to choosing students. There are like different issues of data and how you should deal with that. Another thing is the whole uncertainty or certainty of models. So not only like AI make predictions, right? Especially in supervised learning. For example, to give you an example, you're doing a classifier for cats and dogs, right? You're just feeding in pictures of photos of cats and dogs, and in the end, you want to predict whether that's cat of a dog. Then imagine what happens when you give a picture of a horse or a photo. That's neither a cat or a dog, but AI, like as it is right now, will tell you probably that it's either 50-50, or maybe some of the possibilities are more certain, right? But then you would like to measure how certain it is of this decision. And if it's not certain, to ask you for more data, for example. So this is like the whole issue of like how certain AI or machine learning model is of a given decision. And it's really important because especially when it comes to like how to treat a particular patient in a hospital, like whether you want to run these nuclear weapons or not, maybe it's not the best idea, then you really want to be very certain of a decision. And this is the whole issue of actually uncertainty in machine learning models. This is like still ongoing research. And another issue is just explainability. So what were the ingredients in the machine learning models which caused this model to actually suggest what it's suggesting? And because most of the time people are using AI as black boxes, very intricate functions convoluted with each other, and sometimes very hard to actually get the essence. So those are definitely all the issues. And I don't know exactly what happened with Tay on Twitter and why it went this way, but probably like that wasn't the best idea to deploy it there in the first place.
Twitter just amplifies the voice of
The worst.
The worst kind.
Isn't that?
It's great, but it's the worst.
I think that if you run a model like Tay on a Twitter of like India, or for example, or whatever, would you get the general sentiments and the general like thoughts of an average like Indian person?
You wouldn't, because I guess the loudest voices are usually the ones that get amplified and
emotion
get tweeted or liked more. There was a new research that said 45% of the accounts that were tweeting "Reopen America" were bots. So if you can't really discern between public opinion and just few voices that are amplified so much that it becomes the identity of, I guess, the AI. So
imagine that.
Half of the followers of Trump are bots.
Yeah.
No, but actually, well, if you think about it like really deeply, then actually it makes sense, because there are different organizations who can profit out of the words that Trump says, and you need to watch that closely. Like, bot doesn't necessarily mean that it really operates, like it doesn't necessarily answer all the Trump's comments or stuff like that. It might only observe Trump and then do something based on that. So for example, there's one bot which, for example, looks at what Trump says about private companies and analyzes the sentiment and if it's positive, then it invests in a given stock of a company.
No way.
We've seen that in the market. Like Trump says one great thing about a company or one bad thing, and you see the stock next day totally going in that direction just based on his tweet.
If the markets weren't rigged already to such a level, now you
the thing.
add some sentiment analysis by an AI to trigger buys and sells right away.
And it's not really that hard. Like you can do it at home.
The wild thing about it is it's none of it's even insider or non-public information. It's just based on an opinion, and the market's reacting so much as if it were gaining more information, which is complete manipulation.
During the heights of the trade war, in 2018, I guess you can still say it's still going on till today,
Yeah.
but that initial surge, I don't know if you guys remember this, where the market dipped like 20% just based on, we're adding tariffs on everything. Every single tweet that he mentioned a Chinese company, Chinese holding, those companies just got destroyed the next day.
How does Contentize then protect against bias when it comes to that kind of stuff?
It doesn't. So actually, it doesn't. So I'm a huge advocate for transparency and explainability of AI. But to be honest, at this point, it's too early for me to do that, because that would adding all these layers of being able to deal with bias, uncertainty, explainability, accountability. It just with every step, it just makes the whole problem so much more difficult. And the problem is already so difficult that I would like to be able to solve that in order to get farther along the way.
Gotcha. So do you then foresee a group of people from Contentize trying to manage that bias?
Well, in the end, yes, but right now, because it's like a SaaS platform, the goal is to just see how people will interact with it and getting as much feedback as possible.
And on that, you mentioned Peter Crunch and Contentize being able to interview so many business execs over the past how many ever months. How did that interaction go?
Yes, that was interesting. So basically that was pre-whole Contentize platform. There was not much of an AI, because that was mostly looking for information, different scripts running around, and then really interviewed 1,000 people within 3 months, basically through email. The whole conversation was done through email, and some of the AI bots were sending one email asking whether they can do an interview, and then when the answer came, they sent the questions. And that was pretty crazy because when I started, I just wanted to see whether that would work at all, because I started from scratch. The journalists which are on the site, so maybe that I should mention, are all generated, meaning they do not exist. This whole component is generated with different deep learning techniques.
There you have it. They're not real.
What did it look like? Were these bots saying, "Hey, how's your day going?" Or did you put in style?
Yeah, in the emails we're saying that, hey, I'm running this service, PetaCrunch, where we interview people, and can we ask your CEO, founder for an interview? And basically, that was problematic at first, but only because there were non-interviews on the website. But once I got the momentum and got the first 20 interviews, there was no problem with that. So I started with really small European startups who got funded with 1, maybe 2 million euros. But then it came I think the largest interview was with one Brazilian unicorn, which I don't they raised something like $300 million in the end, and the other was Canva. That was probably the biggest also.
Wow.
So yeah, so Melanie from Canva actually gave the interview to the editor-in-chief of the PetaCrunch.
That's insane.
How fast was it? So when they agreed to say yes, the bot just sent an email right after saying here.
Well, after one day.
Okay,
Nicely.
so you put it live.
Nice,
Okay,
nice.
Well, but actually, the worst part was the last part because it's semi-automated, because I haven't automated the most tedious part, which was putting all the interviews online. So I still have a backlog of 400 interviews that I have to put manually on the site, and I hate it.
At the end of it, did they know?
No.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like saying that in a couple of places right now, like maybe mentioning that on like my Medium sometimes, but no, like that's like not written anywhere on the website. So I also talked with a couple of lawyers to make sure that I'm not breaking any law doing that. But just to stay on the safe side, they like these bots have never assumed the identity of journalists. What they were saying is that, hi, I'm running this website, and do you want to answer a couple of questions? That's it.
That is so fascinating.
From my perspective, like it wasn't really involved when it comes to machine learning, but it was like really interesting from the society perspective, or like how people can interact with bots, or like whether that's natural or not. Like, and it turned out that actually it works pretty fine. Like if you get what you are expecting, then actually nobody protests, because if you think about it, then actually all those startups wanted to have an interview published, right? Because they care about publicity. So this is like a win-win scenario to some extent.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Myself too. I was like, we need to get a bot to run all of these interviews, and then just have like super duper nice, fun conversations with them instead.
Guys, I think we need to rethink our prospecting.
Okay.
There we go.
Well, I can give you some tips off the record, maybe. my AI journalist contacted something like 20,000 companies around the world. So it's really the game of the scale. Like no, like it's not like everyone agreed. Like so, out of 20,000 companies, 1,000 gave an interview.
That's a good conversion rate.
Yeah. What kind of questions were you trying to get out of them? What were the insights that you wanted to get out of these executives? Were they like just general, like, what did you want for your marketing strategy? Like, how could we become valuable for you? Like, what is it?
I think it started because so my previous startup failed, basically. And I was just wondering, okay, maybe I ask some smart people like how they did it. So I want to do it at scale. I want to because I have this, like AI mindset, which means that whatever I try to do it in an automated way at scale and whatever is possible. So I started with this simple goal of trying to understand how you build a successful startup and raise capital, and then like scale up to like a couple hundred employees. So basically, starting from that, I made a template for a couple of questions that I wanted to ask, and those were the questions that actually my bot started to send. And they worked pretty well. Those are like very basic questions, like how it started, how you would describe your startup in like one tweet. What's the next goal for you? How do you see yourself in the future? And most of the so interesting part, I guess, of that was that the bots were triggered for funding rounds, meaning that they were contacting startups which raised funding in the last 1 or 2 months. And also because of that, those startups were more willing to talk about
have press releases.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
is ingenious.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
We need to have literally. This is prospecting for us. Thank you. This is not even off the record.
And actually, but this is like very easy. Like this data is public. You can go on Crunchbase and see like PitchBook or like.
To these AI, pioneers like yourself, do you guys have like a secret meeting at the dawn of dusk or something like that, called the League of Shadows?
50% AI in the meeting,
and the person scribing the meeting notes is just an AI.
Yeah, everybody's an AI.
No, I think like the AI community is generally quite open. Like it seems like everyone is somehow connected, or like have one handshake to 1 or 2 handshakes to other people.
So that's really cool, talking about how you used AI to reach out to all of these executives. I wanted to jump into more of the stylistic aspect of this AI. And since you're an avid writer, you've written 3 books, how do you see this AI helping you or others to improve your writing skills? Because you mentioned that you're constantly trying to improve your writing style.
Do you teach it English?
Yeah. Basically, it works like you can use it to generate fluff, in the sense, meaning you have the first draft of a story very quickly, and then you can work on details. like it's still far away to actually be able to personalize your voice and give you a story which would be really yours to begin with. So what I do mostly is, if I have a personal story to tell, I do it myself. There's like no way around it right now, at least. But if I were to write an article about how marketing works or how you should get a funding as a startup, like something very general, then actually this job would be better done by the machine, which probably seen like hundreds or thousands text like that and can just summarize everything very quickly. That's basically the goal. So whenever something is more generic and doesn't have any personal touch, AI will be better. That's why this kind of techniques work really well for impersonal journalism, marketing. So for example, if you think about press releases, I haven't mentioned that before, but this is probably one of the most boring stuff you can do, because this is like a bunch of data and you want to convey that in a compelling story, but which is written in a very specific way, because it is indirect, it has to be like formal, business attire, blah, blah, blah. So actually AI will be better to draft a story like that. And then a human can just correct that in a couple of places.
Interesting. Okay, so that would be the use for the human stylistic purposes.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's still a lot of cherry picking. I mean, you generate a bunch of stuff, then you choose whatever suits you better, and out of that you create your final story. If you were to create the whole story from scratch, the quality is still not there, at least most of the time, but it's coming. So if you think about it, like this triggers and set for like companies which got funding recently, that's also part of the journalistic journey. If you were to be a journalist, then actually you need to get data. Like, for example, you are a journalist as well, in a way, running a podcast, right? So you need to source your data, you need to contact people, you're acting on some triggers, and maybe part of that can be automated. So for example, like accessing this data, contacting people, that's probably like the easiest way to automate the first step.
I'm trying to think. There's so many applications to this. I mean, news, you have sports, you have politics.
Yeah, so actually, like as a human, you still need to find a particular niche where you can apply those kind of techniques and where you will find your audience. There's like a very nice example from Sweden. So apparently they are probably the most automated when it comes to football news, local football news, because they have like so many football teams in every single city, in every single village. And before automation, they weren't really, like, media weren't even able to cover all that because there were too many football matches. The audience for a particular match was probably very small, because if you take like a third tier city of like, I don't know, population like 10,000 people playing with another 10,000 population city, then the story wouldn't be widely popular. But what they did is that they managed to create the whole automation for all those teams all together, all those football matches. And if you sum up all those audiences together, which are small, but then altogether that consists of like hundreds of thousands of people looking for a particular piece of information. So that's also like interesting, of like taking like very, very niche subject and then scaling it through automation.
So Przemek, was there anything that you picked up from, I guess, your previous experiences with, the many companies that you've worked on and into what you're doing right now? Were there any learnings from it? Was there like data modeling and techniques that you learned somewhere else that's actively being employed in Contentize?
Yeah, sure. So from one side, of course, like my machine learning knowledge is growing, and that's like a cumulative knowledge, so that grows with years. And of course, that from one startup to another, like from research also to startups, that keeps on growing. So that's for the best. Well, another thing is just I'm learning to run a business, because coming from academic background, I had like no exposure to business at all, and that's probably also why the first couple of startups failed, because even though I had co-founders at the time for each of the startup, it didn't go the way we wanted it to go. And I guess we were all very inexperienced in running startup, undervaluing some costs, doing stupid things, making mistakes along the way. like one of the lessons I learned from after running all those 2 startups is like start as quickly as possible and try to monetize some of the things to validate the market instead of like waiting. Because I have this tendency, coming from academia, I have this tendency of like trying to do everything by myself. And
Was there a particular example that I guess you can walk us through in your previous company that looking back, you're like, oh, maybe I should have done it this way, or maybe the team that was there must have taken this action? And
in like general terms, like what we did wrong was that we didn't have enough focus on our core product, especially with running my second company, which was doing optimization using quantum computers. So that was very technical, but we were like between consulting and between trying to build the product.
this was Bohr?
Bohr technology,
Okay.
yeah. And there was not enough of focus on going into one particular niche. So that's definitely what was missing. Actually, we went through Accelerator, a creative destruction lab in Toronto. We were part of the Microsoft Quantum program.
Wow.
We had access to all those stuff. And we were using quantum computing to optimize different traffic problems, basically. So especially if you start to think with your co-founder, then you should really write down everything at the beginning to know like what's your exit strategy. What if you don't like each other after some time and you want to quit, like stuff like that. Seems obvious right now, but only after I went through all of this. And so right now, Content-Tize I'm running by myself. I decided that I don't want to have a co-founder right now. If I find one, I'm happy to join forces.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great that you can tap into all these learnings and effectively use it. Like us, the second this call ends, we are at each other's throats. We are throwing chairs at each other, everything, knives. Yeah, it's pretty nasty over here. But
Why didn't you shave today? Things like that. Like, what the heck? What did you do?
are you going to wear that to the call? Sheesh. Yeah, things like that. No.
Oh,
Just
give each
kidding.
other shit.
No, but I think
no,
that's normal. I guess that's like the beauty of collaboration. And
so on that topic of like being an academic, right? And as you're approaching this as an academic, it's interesting to me because I saw a bunch of your courses on data science.
Yeah, fantastic.
You're still not out of the game. You're still trying to educate people on this matter. And you know what? The one thing that when I trust people who give me information or give me knowledge, as people that we have on the call, is if they try to teach somebody their field of expertise, it naturally reflects that they are willing to like really go deep.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome. I love that like you have this course that you're selling online as well for data science. So like you're at an even more amazing time where last year there were these crazy breakthroughs in ML and AI that just puts you in front of these problems for solving.
Right in the driving seat to
right in the driving seat. It must be exciting. It must be exciting to be a leader at this time. Yeah. And to be solving those problems, like, geez, like your brain must be working like 50,000 miles.
It is exciting. Yeah. But, what's funny is that I haven't started this way because I started really with pure mathematics, which is also fascinating. And I could talk about for hours about what's happening over there, but it doesn't have this leverage on our reality. Like it doesn't have this kind of applications. You can't really see it in real life. So I decided to make this switch. I think that what you're saying is true in the sense that I really love educating people and I really like passing on education. And I think we are living in amazing times when this kind of knowledge is very accessible. So I think with growing awareness, people know that data science is something, that machine learning is something. And the cool thing about that is that there are so many courses which are accessible for free online. So for example, if you think about Coursera, and if you don't need certifications, then you can go on any course, just click on audit the course and see all the visual materials from that course. It's accessing the knowledge from Stanford, Harvard, Caltech, totally for free. I think that's really amazing. And I think we're living in a perfect time when college degree doesn't matter that much. We're also
on that note, you were a master's student, PhD researcher, postdoc at Oxford. So you have been within academia. And now you're teaching on YouTube, you have your own courses. How do you see that shift, accessibility in online platforms as a method to learn versus universities?
basically during my first 2 years of undergrad, I did all the courses possible. Then I was done with that. And for the next years, I was mostly self-taught. So most of my knowledge is actually coming from books. I always preferred learning by myself at home to learning in a class with other students or with a teacher. I get easily distracted by others. That's why I prefer to learn at home, which means that that's why from my perspective, even though I went through all those institutions, it doesn't really matter because I would get the same education in terms of knowledge, no matter where I were.
Yeah, there's all these new programs coming up, these massive online open courses, MOOCs, that are just trying to fill the gap with what universities didn't have. And especially with this teaching and how fast the machine learning, artificial intelligence space is growing. Now there's a whole body of expertise to it. Now there's some new technology that you can tackle to solve certain problems. And now the data is available. It is actually like an amazing time to be in AI and machine learning. To kind of just press on the academic piece, I guess. Mathematics was your thing. What was it about mathematics that made you want to go into artificial intelligence or machine learning? And maybe that it wasn't about the academia. Maybe it just provided you the base. But what was it while you were in academia that you wanted to go into machine learning and artificial intelligence? Tell us about that transition.
That's a great question. So in the first place, I went into mathematics because I love solving problems, and I love solving, I love having intellectual challenges and really hard ones. I love thinking in terms of frameworks. I love building huge theories, proving theorems, stuff like that. So when I was choosing pure mathematics, I think that was the purest form of intellectual challenges, and I went into mathematics because of that. And then within mathematics, I went into Langland's program, which was it was at the intersection of three different domains of mathematics: number theory, algebraic geometry, representation theory. And it was probably the hardest thing you could do in mathematics back then. So I went into that particular domain because of that, because I loved the complexity of the problems, of all the objects involved. And at some point, I had this revelation that it's not so pure as I thought. The mathematics itself is not a pure science, because you still need kind of a social validation for your proofs. It's not only one thing is proving something to yourself. You think you have a proof of a theorem, but other thing is actually writing down a research paper, presenting at the conference, and then having other scientists, other researchers agree with you that you have indeed the correct solution. There's still an ongoing case with, for example, Mochizuki proof of ABC conjecture. So ABC conjecture is this huge conjecture from 50 years ago. I won't get into details, but this Japanese mathematician basically published around 2,000 pages of mathematical proofs claiming that he has proved this conjecture. And he was really a respected mathematician, but no one up to this day can understand what he has written in that. And they can't identify the flaw. And he is really reluctant to try to explain that to others. So he's isolated in Japan, doesn't really travel, doesn't want to explain. So cases like that, so that appeared back when I was at Oxford. So that was one thing. Okay, maybe you can automate part of the verification procedure. So somehow teach machines how to reason, how to check correctness of proofs, so that mathematicians don't have to do that, which is not the most exciting part of the work. So putting all this together, I decided that, okay, it's time to go into machine learning. I don't have this enjoyment of doing pure mathematics anymore. And moreover, I don't believe I have any impact on this world, apart from the very small circle of 50 people, which you see everywhere on the conference. Because it was this domain of Langland's program is basically 200 people around the world. And we knew each other, we met at the same conferences, and whether that's Japan, US, Canada, Europe, France, it really doesn't matter, because it was always the same group of people. I wanted to go on the next adventure. And I thought I couldn't imagine myself working on the same stuff with the same group of people for the next 40 years of my life. So I'm actually rotating my hobbies from time to time. And recently, probably the thing I love is Magic the Gathering. So I don't know if you know the game. I got back to it after like 15 years of being away from it since my childhood. I go to different LGSs, so local game stores, and try to play a game. So that's cool. Sports also. So I picked skateboarding like 2 years ago, and I love it.
Speaking of experiences, in your books, you also talked about travels. I wanted to ask what have been the best travel stories that you've had?
Yeah, I really love traveling. I was like very blessed with the possibility to travel for all the math conferences. So that allowed me to travel really the whole world. And probably I was the most impressed with a couple of countries. Well, Rio de Janeiro. This is like a love-hate relationship. I mean, I love it and I'm scared at the same time because
Yeah.
there's like crazy vibe of this city, which is so alive and so brutal at the same time. Like human life means nothing, but at the same time, people are super helpful, super loving, and yet you see this. I have a couple of friends which I asked from Rio, which I asked like, yeah, like have you experienced anything like drastic? And they said like, well, we were pretty lucky. Only like once someone pointed a gun at us, and that was fine. So this is like a different level of like what safeness and what being lucky is.
Did you see the favelas?
I wasn't very smart because I went to one of the favelas like at 1 a.m. in the night.
Oh my gosh.
I went with a Brazilian friend, so I felt relatively okay, but but still. So that was one thing, and the other and on the other spectrum, like totally opposite to that, I was like super impressed with Japan, and especially Kyoto, which is an ancient, amazing city where you have mountains, ocean, river going through the city. When it comes to culture, you have all these festivals going on through the whole summer.
So, Przemek, you're constantly trying to solve problems. You're always tinkering with different ideas. I wanted to know towards maybe like the middle to kind of end of your career, what would success look like for you? Because I feel like it's for yourself because you're always looking for the next thing. It's like a never-ending process and journey for you. So what is your long-term goal with AI, what you're building, and things that you want to discover and understand better?
No, okay. So first of all, I want to tackle the success part. Because I think like I will never achieve success in my own eyes, in the sense that depending on how you look at it, like I heard like people saying that I am successful already because like I did all these degrees, I had these companies, I was like on Forbes 30 under 30 and blah blah blah. I can understand that, but from my perspective, I'm not doing the stuff I'm doing for like a particular goal. It's not for the particular kind of money, fame, or like whatever you want to put on that list. It's for the process itself. I mean, I love like tinkering with all these things. I love like thinking about hard problems. So there's no end goal. What I would love to do is when it comes to like bigger goals, I would like to have influence on shaping artificial general intelligence. And I would like to see it in my lifetime. So that would be probably the biggest thing. Yeah. Like a machine able to do all the manual stuff that humans can do at the same level or even beyond that, but totally artificial.
Is there a message out there that you like to get to the AI community or the people who are in this field trying to learn, trying to be better, trying to solve problems?
Maybe just one thing. I think patience is key. And like don't look at the local minima or maxima, because like everyone has worse or better moments, but actually if you look from the macro perspective, the crucial thing is that the whole thing is cumulative and you get more knowledge over time. You will be better at different scenarios and you can react better to different things. So especially for anyone who's starting and like feel that he's inadequate, that doesn't know enough, like whatever it is, it's pretty standard. Like, and no one knows everything, and it's part of the process to learn all the stuff. So really, patience is key. Like digging and digging and digging deeper into everything. Yeah, thank you too. I mean, I had really a lot of fun, and that was also great to learn from you and have all these laughs together.
Is there like a way people could reach out to you, listen to the stuff that you teach, your courses, your personal website, your company? There are so many things, your books. your research. Mike, there's so many things, but if there's one thing that could encapsulate all of what someone needs to follow you, if you want to provide that.
Yeah, I think like the easiest way, depending on what you want to do, is either follow me on Twitter/LinkedIn, or if you want to consume my content, then Medium/YouTube.
Thanks for listening to Things Have Changed.
Be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode and follow us on our Instagram at @THC_pod.
We're going to see you next time.